People talk a lot about soft skills, transferable skills. Lots of job descriptions end up being written from the perspective of needing 4 years experience in X field and have knowledge of this quite specific process. Actually, that may be excluding some of the best learners out there, right? So it's a two-way thing that I think we can make a lot of progress in both ways. Yeah. But to start with, to have these conversations through things like LabMates around the identity of a scientist and what that can bring to society in general, not just from which societal or academic problem can be solved by applying this particular scientific discipline.
Kia ora everyone, and welcome to LabMates Beyond the Bench. We're sharing the stories of how scientists and their research move from the lab bench and into the real world. Today, I'm joined by Matt, who works now at MBIE, but has a PhD in chemistry. And we're really looking forward to hearing a little bit about your academic to beyond journey today. So could you tell us a little bit about what you studied, where you studied, and things like that?
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. Thanks for the invite. It's great to be here. Matt, at MBIE at the moment, and where I came from, as you say, I started in chemistry. So I really started with, to be honest, I think some great school teachers in chemistry that got me really into that thing, super curious about it, and continued from there to study at university with a bit of industrial experience in my degree, which I think was really formative for me. So I spent a year of my degree at a pharmaceutical company, GSK, which was really important. And then I got to the end of my degree and thought, I don't know anywhere near enough about this topic yet. So I need to do a PhD. So I studied at Imperial College for a PhD in organic chemistry, where I was working on a kind of total synthesis of a natural product there. So quite very academic topic with perhaps not the most obvious use case out there in the world. And my PhD at the time was co-funded as well by another pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca. Oh, wow. So I always had this really close link with industry at the time, and I found that quite inspiring, seeing the paths that people like me might take in the future. And I sort of had it in my mind to go and explore industry after my PhD.
Interesting.
By the way things played out, though, I actually got to the end of my PhD and had a similar thought. Actually, there's so much more that I'd love to learn about this topic, really. And I wanted also, after having had quite an academic sort of training style PhD, to try something that was a bit more applied. So I went to Germany for a PhD for a couple of years and worked on a field called organocatalysis. So that's basically figuring out how reactions work and how you can mimic biology in order to do that. So I felt like that was a step more applied, perhaps a step more towards industry from the kind of studies that I did. Wonderful time, really just a moment when you realize that one of the coolest things about science is how international it can be, and people coming from all over the world communicating in the same language, but really the language is science, and that was quite a beautiful time. But yeah, the path for academia was, I don't think, ever in my mind. I always knew that the industry was going to be for me, and I ended up going into the crop protection industry. So I worked for 8 years or so in the UK and back in Germany as well.
Wow.
In a couple of crop protection companies, attempting to invent herbicide, insecticide molecules, learning lots about plant and insect biology and toxicology and environmental science and the like. Really amazing learning experience. And in 2021, moved to New Zealand. So my wife's from New Zealand, and that's the reason we decided to move here. And at the time, it was a crazy time with COVID. And it was really the moment just to kind of stop and say, actually, it's time for a change in the career. And it so happened there was a scheme starting up in New Zealand called the R&D tax incentive. And that's basically New Zealand's way of supporting, incentivizing research and development in business. And in order to do that, you basically need a bunch of scientists and engineers to run that thing. People who can actually speak the language of science and technology to the people doing it and make the scheme accessible and make that thing work. Yeah. And so I happened to arrive in the country at very close to the time that was being set up, and I started as a chemist there. And I've worked actually at Callaghan Innovation and MB since. So I'm the director of the R&D tax incentive at MB, and it's a fantastic job. I absolutely love what I do. Never would have thought that leaving the lab for basically no reason other than love. Yeah. would have led to such an interesting career move. And so, yeah, I think that's how we find ourselves talking together today because yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting about that early phase that you had was how much you always kind of wanted to go to industry and yet still felt like you needed more academic training from your PhD to postdoc, whereas everyone's keen to sort of jump out straight away. You kind of saw the value in the academic training even further. And then I guess that jump from coming back to New Zealand and then seeing the opportunity to move to Callahan Innovation, MB, it looks like you bounced backwards and forwards a couple of times. How did you find that sudden jump to not being in the lab? And did you feel like you were losing your identity at all? Or was it a sort of a moment of recognizing your transferable skills?
I have to admit, when I was making the move, I had quite a bit of apprehension and anxiety. I still identify as a scientist, and at the time I certainly did. And I felt as if I was doing my dream job at the time as a scientist.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a bit of apprehension about the move. But very quickly you realize that quite a few of the things that you learn along the way as being a scientist are rather independent of the subject matter and can be applied really broadly. And fortunately, where I landed, I found myself surrounded by people usually of different technical backgrounds, but usually of either an engineering or a scientific background. And it was really interesting how much we had in common with one another as well. And how when we applied ourselves to problems, we got some really cool results really quite quickly. And that was really satisfying. I came from a place actually in industry where the whole department, people certainly of my age anyway, would have had a really similar CV to me. So they would have had, a PhD and a postdoc in a handful of labs in the world, and would have been working together. And although that's a really exciting and intellectual environment to be in, when you're faced with a problem, you tend to respond in similar ways, right? You tend to want to solve problems in similar ways. But when you're surrounded by people who've worked in pharmacy, in product development, in machine learning, in organic chemistry, all of a sudden you have all sorts of ways of solving problems. And I found that really, really exciting.
Yeah. That's really cool. And what is it that you do, I guess, day to day, or maybe your first jump from the lab and now? What were the first sort of set of skills that you took with you that helped you get that job, or you think helped you get that job? And was there anything that you missed and you had to kind of learn as you went?
Yes, I think the first role that was kind of outside the lab, at least one step out of the lab, was for the final 5 years of my crop protection career when I was a lab leader, and actually in 5 years probably only ran a handful of experiments personally.
Yeah.
And that step was really interesting because a lot of the time I was interacting with people from outside my scientific discipline, talking to the people running tests in the glasshouse, talking to the agronomists out in the field, talking to the toxicologists running the studies. And just picking up bits and pieces of how they work, learning to understand quickly what was important for them and being able to communicate important ideas from our lab into what I could understand. And so I think that was at least a half step along the way and was quite formative for me, I think. And then coming into what was essentially an expert role in government, it was really interesting to me to see how I never realized before how much the idea of a customer and the idea of personal interaction was really important to me as personally. Because when you're in a lab and you're working in an industry that has a pathway to market, which is at least 10, often up to 20 years, the work you do on a daily basis is really detached from that customer. So if you make a really amazing change and you have an awesome idea that makes a lot of progress, you're not going to see that come to fruition in a generation almost. Whereas I found that really exciting to move into a situation where actually if you have a good idea on a Monday, you can see the effects of that on a Friday if you want, with real people and at scale as well.
Yeah.
So that was something I didn't realize I was missing until I discovered it. That sort of customer connection, that fast turnaround and fast feedback.
Yeah.
Was a real cool change.
I think that's what I quite like too. I think that's something maybe didn't realize myself, that ability to, that's probably what brings me to startups and working with that idea that you can grow something really quickly and see that feedback really quickly, talk to customers, whether it's like a piece of marketing or something that you do. Weirdly quite satisfying. And I think that's something that I lacked a little bit when I was doing my lab work as well. It kind of felt just too far away from the real issue. And that's why I started moving more into translational research more and more in my career as well. But that's interesting. So you're telling me that your government role was fast moving. Is that?
Yeah, it's stereotypically not. It's not the archetype of the government worker that it's fast moving.
Yeah.
I think given my wonderful team that I've found myself working with, many of us had private sector backgrounds, almost all, in fact. And it's really interesting to see how much everybody tended to think about the world empirically, meaning everything's an experiment. And so they're very happy to just interrogate the world through experiments and try things out. And importantly, pay attention to what actually happens when you try things out. Pay attention to the results, right?
The
When you're a
results,
scientist,
yeah.
you can set up as many experiments as you like. If you're not paying attention to the results, they're absolutely meaningless. You'll see scientists always talk about the results, the progress that they're making, the things that they're learning are really important. So they're curious people who are independent learners, right? That approach to things has absolutely huge power, I think, across the board, outside of science and everywhere we are. So we tended to treat our problem, which is, a complex system of funding New Zealand businesses to do science and technology.
Yeah.
As, a series of experiments of trying things out and learning about it gradually. That came quite naturally to us because of all our respective backgrounds. So we were quite fortunate there to have pulled that team together. But I think since then, we've actually doubled down on that whole idea and have treated that as an identity, have re-held the identity as a group of scientists and engineers working on this thing. And we're starting to have some really, really cool results, I think.
That's really cool. So did you get this initiative? Was that just forming when you started the role, this R&D tax incentive?
Yes. So it's been around since 2019.
And so I guess in that time, now that I think about it, you've got this beautiful report, don't you? But in that time, there's a lot that's happened and there's a lot that's being measured and a really cool set of, experiments that you've tested in that time. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's everything from something as simple as the way we communicate with our customers, the kinds of emails we send, to the way we manage our workflows, all kinds of things, all the while being able, hopefully, to have some credibility with our customers, which is really important, right? So as soon as, hopefully, when any member of the public, any business owner, any R&D practitioner, R&D manager in the country, in any industry, in any sector, any size or age of business, approaches us with an R&D plan, that we're able to speak the same language in some way and make sense of what they're saying, be trusted, and make that process basically as painless as it possibly could be. The last thing, and we all know what that's like, but we have a sense of credibility, but also empathy, right? We know what it's like to be drawn away from the thing that you're busy with, to be filling out a form.
Yeah.
It's the last thing anybody wants to do. And so we think about that every day. So we try to make that process as straightforward as it possibly can be, while making it in the interest of the New Zealand taxpayer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so really cool thing is that more R&D is happening in New Zealand business today than has at any time in history. Obviously not entirely due to our scheme, but we really hope that as it's compounding over time, that it's starting to have an effect. And that's what that report is just starting to show, that perhaps there is an effect, that something in the order of $1.8 billion of R&D has been done in New Zealand business that wouldn't have been done in the absence of the scheme. So that really gets us out of bed in the morning and is super exciting. And it's that transfer of that. You're working in a lab, you're running some experiments, you're contributing to one piece of an absolutely enormous project with all the work that you're doing. Whereas here, that project is funding for the entire business community of New Zealand to get really cool stuff done and pulling barriers out of the way for those people. And you know what that feels like. Pulling those barriers out of the way feels really, really motivating for us all.
That's awesome. How big is the team currently then that work on this? Because it must be massive to support all of that R&D.
Yeah, so we actually get some help, really important help from Inland Revenue as well, because I put my hand up and say that I'm certainly not a finance person, and clearly to fund all of this work and manage all that process. And the clue is in the name, the tax incentive. Inland Revenue have a huge role to play there, right? And there are actually more Inland Revenue staff than there are staff at MB right now. But the MB team is 19 people.
Wow.
And with that, we do a bunch of roles. So we have as many sectors covered as possible, so that we can understand what R&D plans people are engaging with, and otherwise just people who understand what it's like to be in an innovative business. So they're the people who go out and explain how the scheme works, hopefully publicize the scheme, make it as accessible as possible, remove as many barriers to entry as possible, and in the end, get the flywheel turning for R&D in New Zealand.
Yeah. Do you think there's a bunch of businesses that still are yet to discover this initiative or are too scared to put time and energy towards it? Is there still an untapped?
The first question I'd answer yes. So I'm certain there are more businesses. The second reason, I'm not sure. There might be some who are too scared, but there are all kinds of reasons, I think. that
Yeah,
people might not
probably.
go. It might not only be that they're scared, but just some stats. So the R&D survey in New Zealand, which is run by Stats NZ, comes out
Mhm.
every couple of years, suggests that there are about 2,200 R&D performing entities in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And more or less at the moment, the R&D tax
Yeah.
incentive is something close to about 1,000 businesses applying for it.
Okay.
So that suggests to us that there's perhaps some headroom.
Yeah.
At the moment as well, about 2 out of every $3 spent on R&D in New Zealand business goes through the scheme, which suggests there's a third of R&D
Yeah.
happening in New Zealand business. It's not supported by the scheme. It basically makes R&D cheaper, allows you to do more with the same amount, right? So we think there's a bit of growth there for sure.
Yeah. For sure. And I like that. That's completely uncapped in a way, right? Because the more you are spending on your R&D, the more you should be able to recoup back for your tax
Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah,
initiative. Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Very cool. And out of the 19 people that you have in your team, how many are STEM backgrounds, do you think?
Vast majority. We have
Probably all of them.
almost all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have
Yeah.
some administrative function and so on, but pretty much all. Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Is there anything that role from your lab background that maybe you weren't set up for, that maybe you kind of had to learn as you went along because your lab academic training hadn't really prepared you for, or was it more your industry training?
I think when you have that distance from the customer and you have that, I guess the stereotype of the bench chemist,
Mm,
not getting out there too much, not being
yeah.
so used to talking to customers, talking to people. I'm not sure that if I have any skill there, I don't know if I gained that at the lab bench. But certainly I think that experience of having had the international experience of seeing
Mm,
the ways of lots of different people coming together, both at the postdoc stage, people from all kinds of nationalities in the institute that I worked in.
yeah.
The same in London, one of the more international cities in the world as well. Just coming into contact with so many diverse people. I think
Yeah.
you get that through a science education. I think if I have any ability in the sort of communication, speaking to people,
Hmm.
being empathetic to customers, it's probably derived from that aspect of my career.
Yeah. That makes sense. And if you wanted to, if someone came to you and said, I like this career path you've taken, I think that you've carved out a really great set of skills, but I'm just a biology master's, or I did chemistry, and how does someone who's currently still studying but thinks that they might want to sort of go into that government type role, or even industry, what kind of skills should they be, I guess, accentuating on their CVs or preparing themselves by doing something in particular to kind of take those roles?
Yeah, maybe a couple of things there. First of all, couldn't recommend highly enough getting some kind of placement in an industrial setting. So whether that's something through your university, some kind of experience grant that are run now by MB, some kind of collaboration in that respect can give you such access and also test you, also allow you to grow in certain areas, right? You can become aware of how things can be done in a completely different way. And sometimes those things will be a great match for you, and others you'll realize actually that's something I want to learn, right? So I
Hmm.
really encourage that. And then there are, I think, a bunch of skills that most scientists end up having in droves
Yeah.
that they don't necessarily realize are super useful out there in the wider business world, the wider economy.
Yeah.
And secondly, that actually people doing the hiring don't realize enough how valuable that could be. And I think there are a few of them, right? So how many job descriptions do you see where there's a request that you can manage ambiguity or thrive in ambiguity, right?
I
That's
hate that.
basically what a scientist is, right? As a scientist, that's your job. You go and
Yeah.
look for these moments, thrive. You're just searching for the places that are the most ambiguous, right? The places where there are the least knowledge, and you live
Yeah.
there, and you set up camp there, and you try and push out from those places. If you're not in a place where it's mostly ambiguous, something's not quite right, actually, right?
Yeah.
And so the fact that you're comfortable there and you've had training and you know how to navigate those places is massive. And it's
Hmm.
something that, having gone through something like a PhD, a master's, or a R&D project in your early career can really help you with, right?
Yeah.
And one thing Another one is, so in our team, I think one thing we have the most in common is that we're all super curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to build on that a bit, I think what we'd all say is that we're basically independent learners.
Good way to look
I
at it.
think that's an absolutely massive one in the world of work. So
Yeah.
when you're in a PhD, for example, you've got a problem to solve, and that there's no answer for that. No one's going to tell you the answer for that. You've just got to go and figure it out. And when you're confronted with that for the first time, that is really quite a confronting thing. You've gone through school where you go and you learn something and you go and regurgitate that in an exam.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time in a PhD, you've basically got to, or some research project, right? It's on you to figure that answer out, and not only figure it out, but demonstrate, because there's no right or wrong answer that anyone can mark you on, right? You've just got to demonstrate to the rest of the world that the answer's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so that attitude in the world of work is extremely powerful, I think, and underrated. And if you see that early in somebody at work, they often end up getting quite a lot more responsibility, a lot of trust very early, right? To be able to give them tough stuff because they know they can handle the ambiguity and they can figure stuff out, right? And another thing is actually communication, right? We've talked about how being on a bench you might be quite withdrawn from people to an extent, but right, I think those with scientific approaches tend to be really trusted communicators.
Yeah.
They've gone extremely deep on at least one topic, but often a bunch of topics, right? So they've ridden that whole, I guess, the Dunning-Kruger curve, right? So we at least once, but probably a number of times, right? So they know what it feels like to think you know your stuff, and then what it feels like to fall into the valley of despair where you realize there's way more to know than you've ever known.
Yeah.
And then slowly get to the point where you're actually becoming an expert and competent in that field, right? And I see that play out with the way people communicate when they really are confident in what they're saying and they're used to backing it up. They can communicate in an entirely different way to when they're on that early phase, when they're yes, we have some indications, we have some idea, and they're very measured at that early stage, and they don't tend to pick things up too early. That can come across as a bit negative at times, but I think on the whole, I think it's a positive. And then a couple other things. We talked about that sort of empirical approach to the world in general. How often do you see in a job ad, results driven, something like that?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Is that not exactly what a scientist is? Like you can, as we talked about this a little bit earlier, like any scientist could put on 500 experiments or 5,000 experiments.
Yeah.
You get no credit for that. And no one will claim and tell the world about how many experiments they've put on. It's only if you pay attention to the results, right, that it actually counts. I actually think that's a skill you learn in being a scientist as well, is that actually in life it's the results that count. And the experiments, you can start as many campaigns as you like. You can get as many things going as you like, as many wheels turning as you like. It's actually paying attention, actually realizing whether something has been successful or otherwise. And regardless of the success, learning something from that. And as a scientist, that becomes the norm. And that's not naturally the norm, I don't think, for humans in general. You've got things like confirmation biases related to this, I think. We're all people.
A lot of that, yeah.
Right? So we tend to pay attention to those bits of evidence that support our belief and downplay evidence that sort of says otherwise. And I think, again, as a scientist, that is just completely trained out of, well, not completely, partially trained out of you, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Science is going to kick your ass, isn't it? If you
pretty much, they'll come after you with your hypotheses.
It'll come after you. You will only be one winner if you let yourself fall to confirmation bias. And as humans, right, in the world, and that's I think a superpower that any scientist has, right? They're I think more aware of the pitfalls of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's so many things. And I'd say the last thing, which is another really common thing on a job ad as well, being operationally agile. You'll see that expression all over the place. What does that actually mean? Well, it means to be able to react to results, to be able to pivot in real time.
Yeah,
to not
problem solve.
necessarily stick to a long-term plan, but to be able to divert to what's important and pay attention to reality. Again,
Hmm.
is that not what a scientist is?
Everything a scientist is.
It's exactly what being a scientist is, right? So I think positioning yourself as someone who's trained in all of those things is
Hmm.
a really good way of looking at the job market, because they're all over job ads, these things. And actually, when you encounter the world of work outside of a lab bench,
Yeah.
that's how it is, right? And you're actually quite well equipped for it. You may
Hmm.
not be using biochemistry or your quantum computing or whatever topic you studied.
Yeah.
You may not be using that directly, but so many of the transferable skills you've built and really developed at sort of pretty high level over your career
Yeah.
to date are gonna work for you.
I think that's amazing because the number of times that I've in the past looked at a job ad and gone, I don't really know, or the only example I can give is maybe an experiment that went wrong and then I did something else. And it's like, that's not like it's wrong, but it's talking about it in the right way that a business would understand and not going too into the weeds about the actual experiment or the problem that I was trying to solve, but more the methodology or the approach that I had to
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's really so anyone who's gone deep, right? They've Someone who's done a PhD, for instance, has almost certainly they've gone deep enough down a certain rabbit hole. They've become so specific, they've
Yeah.
essentially become the world expert on something, which is quite a cool way of looking at it. Like there's no one in the world who knows more about this than you at this moment. And I think somebody who's gone through that has proven their ability to learn.
Come on.
You cannot question the ability of someone who's gone through that to learn. And so
Hmm.
if there's a particular bit of technical knowledge that's required for a job,
You
back
can learn it.
yourself. Back yourself. Yeah, and demonstrate that learning power, because it's really exceptional. I know nothing, or I shouldn't say it now because I probably do know something now, but I knew nothing about tax when I started, and it was really not part of my world in any way.
Hmm.
But having spent enough time around it, having hopefully an ability to pick things up and figure things out as
Yeah.
I go along, I now know enough about that to do my job perfectly adequately and thriving in that environment. Another thing that you learn as well is, because of that kind of appreciation of expertise,
Hmm.
you tend to know the right moment to ask questions. So when I was a chemist in a company called Bayer working on insecticide, I was the chemist lead in a project.
Hmm.
If I'm thinking about I don't know, the formulation or the uptake into soil, or how the insects feed, or how the people spraying insecticide are going to get exposed to something and the toxic effects of that and residues on food. I don't know anything about those things, right? So it's quite normal to go and seek out an expert for those things,
Hmm.
and never expect yourself to sort of solve every problem. And I think that collaborative, cross-disciplinary nature of pretty much every scientific project
Yeah.
also sets you in good stead for the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Just very few problems can be solved by sort of one
One
person's
person.
brain, right? It's always about, like, where are the skills here? Who can we ask? Where can we draw the knowledge from? Again, that's another thing that was just a way of working before,
Yeah.
and now comes across in our group as a bit of a strength, right? The way that we ask
Yeah.
questions.
That's true. It's a superpower.
Yeah,
I love that. I love it so much. And from the other side, so that's a lot of experience around how to position yourself as a scientist for your real world transferable skills. Do you see the gap from a hiring perspective, or from the job descriptions, or the other side of the table if you've been involved in interviews and understanding that process? Is there a gap in terms of the way PhDs or researchers in general are viewed from the outside as well? Do you think it's a disconnect that exists from both angles?
I'm sure it exists from both sides, and I think that's why it's really important that things like LabMates exist.
Did I lead you into that?
No, but it's true. It's really true. Um, I think we've talked about a handful of strengths that I perceive
Hmm.
in in people I've worked with, either inside or outside of science, things I've thought about myself. I think in every sense we underappreciate the value of those things
Hmm.
as scientists.
Yeah.
And then from the other side, people talk a lot about soft skills, transferable skills, but lots of job descriptions end up being written from the perspective of needing 4 years experience in X field and have knowledge of this quite specific process,
Yeah.
where actually that may be excluding some of the best learners out there, right? So it's a two-way thing that I think we can make a lot of progress in both ways. But to start with, to have these conversations through things like LabMates around the identity of a scientist and what that can bring to society in general, not just from which societal or academic problem can be solved by applying this particular scientific discipline. Now, how can we all work together using all these things we've learned, using this common language that we've got, this way of thinking about the world? Enormous progress everywhere. Think of human progress in general. Like, I don't think it's controversial to say that, human flourishing has come about largely thanks to science, right? And that scientific approach, just developing that, has really changed things. And why shouldn't that be true for just the world of work as well? I actually believe that. And there's, definitely progress to be made on both sides.
I think that's so nice to hear from someone who's also so embedded now in a government organization that comes through in your own hiring processes. And I would like to see more of that happening. And it's just nice to know that there are more and more scientists coming into these organizations, probably with that mindset and understanding that other scientists, kind of opening a door to allow other scientists to come into those kinds of organizations and put that mindset into them and hopefully make that progress or that transition. Because there's so many amazing scientists right now looking for jobs as well, and these are amazing people with amazing skill sets.
It's really timely from that perspective, particularly in New Zealand, right? And also there's this idea that it's not necessarily a one way. For me, I struggled with that sunk cost fallacy. I've spent my entire adult life working on, getting better at doing chemistry. But what on earth am I doing abandoning that, right? That was a difficult moment for me. But once you accept that that's going to happen, there's really a lot you can make of whatever the next thing is. And if it had turned out a year or two down the line that I decided that wasn't for me, I would have been hopefully just as employable back in the world of the bench in the lab as I previously was. Hopefully wouldn't have been left behind by the science, which is maybe the fear that things move along so fast. But it really is those transferable skills, those same approaches to problems. Because really, in science, everything's new anyway. It's always new. And so if you come back and it's a little bit more new, it's just a different type of new. And I think you'll be ready to go back. So it's people sometimes see it, I think, as a one-way street. And if we had more examples of people doing that jump, maybe going back, I'm not aware of too many examples, but I think we could do with more.
I'm not aware of as many examples, and I feel like that was like a myth that existed, and it might not be necessarily true, but there is something around the way a scientist is measured in terms of their number of years that they've existed in. They call it academic age since your first publication, and therefore your outputs are kind of divided by that. And so if you spent 2 years somewhere else, you don't look as effective. And it's all around publish or perish kind of metrics. And I think that's like the frustrating thing. And the one thing that LabMates is also trying to unpick is how do you show impact and doing impactful work that's not necessarily a publication of a certain metric to be a good scientist. And it should be about your contributions overall. And doing industry or spending time somewhere else should be a good thing that contributes to, I guess, you as a person and as a scientist, regardless. So, yes, I'd like to see it being easier to transition to any job, including back to academia, if that was something you wanted to do. Yeah. Cool. Are there any other myths that you would like to bust?
Goodness. Myths I'd maybe like to celebrate more, particularly in New Zealand, is that, see, in terms of innovation, right, you've got, this is not really a career-based one, but more a sort of science one.
Go for it.
Been thinking about a bit recently. We often think how innovation happens is the story that we tell ourselves. The narrative is that you have a professor in the lab somewhere comes across some kind of discovery, and with that discovery, they then unlock access to this new offering, this new technology that hits a market and transforms a market, society, and so on. That's a very common narrative that we tell ourselves.
It is.
Whereas we look at business and we look at almost a lot of business R&D,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of innovation actually happens the other way around,
Yeah.
where there's a market need somewhere. So there's a problem that needs to be solved out there in the world. And someone says, I'm going to solve that problem. They don't actually, at that point, they don't care what discipline they use, what scientific discipline or technology they end up using to solve that problem. They're just going to solve it.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening there is people maybe dabble in one discipline and another. They pull multiple together. And actually, that's how most innovation happens in business. That's the narrative that we don't often talk about and tell ourselves. And in terms of the sort of spend on R&D activity, the number of R&D jobs that are in New Zealand.
Yeah.
I don't have any stats on this, but I bet if we looked at the market capitalization of big companies and how they began, quite a lot of them will be like that. And I still think, especially in New Zealand, we tend to tell ourselves the narrative. It's about commercializing public research. It's actually both. It's actually both. And people solving market problems need access to skills. They need access to knowledge. They need people to be ready to solve these problems and be ready to be adaptable, to switch discipline slightly or team up with somebody from a different discipline. I think that's the way the industry is going, and setting ourselves up for that's, I think, the right thing to do.
Yeah. Love this thought process you've gone down, because you're exactly right. Like, it's the research getting out into the real world. There are so many steps along that, like market research. Are you solving a real problem? All of that. But there are actual real problems of people who are going, I have this problem. I just need, for me lately, it's I just need a data scientist to help me with this piece. So I have a little bit of R&D that I'm just now thinking about. And I'm the classic case of, I'm not sitting there doing the data sciencey stuff and trying to figure out how I'm going to apply it to something. I need the specialty. So now I'm basically looking for a piece of expertise. And like, that is the problem with the university system being quite siloed and locked away in their research capacity. And they tend to go to similar researcher conferences with other people like them. And it's the industry that want access to those people, and that's the piece that's not necessarily happening so well, and maybe why LabMates also exists.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a profession, right? Research commercialization is a true profession, and there's a really tough thing to do, and there are lots of people working really hard at this.
Yeah,
and it's just a difficult thing. But having those systems align, the collaboration work at the right moments, have both the pull from industry, the push from academia, and that working in the right way. I think if you get those settings right somehow, it's tough.
Yeah.
If you get them anywhere near right, you're doing well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's because there's no playbook for any of that, right? It's not, you can't follow any set rules because everything is going to be so different. Every deal you do, every partnership that exists is going to be something that's just going to look a bit different. So it's, how do you create spaces for that to flourish in its own right and allow for that to happen, and have the right mindset in the different sides and the different, I guess, government as well, initiatives.
Yeah. And just going back to the start again, that idea of being somebody who's had exposure to the academic world, maybe spent some time in an industrial placement somewhere, you've seen how things work. If there's somebody who's coming through who can have some great ideas on that and think about that, it's somebody who's had that kind of path. So again, just endorse that and encourage that path for anyone.
Yeah. Wonderful. I feel like you've answered this question, but do you still see yourself as a scientist?
Totally, yeah. I think I always will. Yeah. I may not be working on chemistry any longer directly, but I'll apply to more or less anything I do.
Yeah, it seems to be an embedded mindset that you have. That obviously was clear from the whole discussion we've just had, but never know, you might have surprised me. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you, Matt, for joining me on the podcast. It's been amazing sharing your journey from academia, a bit of industry, and now into more government. It's been amazing to hear about the transferable skills you've developed and sort of sending that path back down for other people to follow your journey. So thank you.
Thank you. It was great to chat.
If you enjoyed this podcast today, please give us some love. You can share it, you can like it, you can follow along and subscribe. Either way, we just really would love to see the appreciation for these podcasts so we can keep them going. If you know someone who has a story that might be interesting to share, then please pass on the details to us so that we can get in touch and do some more of these podcasts. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time.